Hello, good morning, good afternoon for Europe, and good evening for Asia. I'm delighted to welcome you to this INSEAD Lifelong Learning webinar. My name is Ksenia Votinova. I'm an INSEAD MBA attendee, co-founder of LeVPN, and also a business coach for INSEAD online and corporate programs on digital transformation and innovation, including the program on strategy in the age of digital disruption that completed just now recently. So it's my pleasure to moderate this webinar today. Today, we will be discussing how to lead a customer-centric digital transformation. And I'm very honored to introduce to you our speakers, Professor Jörg Niesing and Fred Geyer. Jörg is a senior affiliate marketing professor at INSEAD and also the program director of INSEAD Executive Education Programs, leading digital marketing strategy and B2B marketing strategies. He's a globally recognized leader on digital transformation, digital strategy, customer-centric strategies, and data analytics, and has authored a series of reports and frameworks on these topics. He also, during his career, he spent over a decade in management consulting. Then Fred Geyer is a senior partner at Propet, one of the world's leading digital transformation consultancies. And he's joining us today from Boston. Fred has helped large financial service, healthcare, and technology companies grow and transform. He will share with us his perspective from his experience helping these B2B clients undertake customer-first transformations and address the challenges of digital disruption.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Fred. So both Fred and Jörg co-authored the book called The Definitive Guide to B2B Digital Transformation, where they explain how to drive uncommon growth by prioritizing customers over technology. They also launched the resource hub, b2bdigitaltransformation.com, where you can access their research, webinar recordings, reports, and much more. So today, we are very honored because they will share with us some keys to successful customer-centric digital transformation. So welcome, Jörg and Fred.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
And thank you to everyone who joined us today and could attend this webinar. There was 1,145 of you who signed up to this webinar. So thank you very much for joining us. And so let's start. So before we start our discussion, so let's check with our audience, what brings you here today. So we're going to run this poll where you see it launched now on the screen. So we ask you to answer the question, so what are the key drivers of digital transformation within your organization? And you can pick up to 3 answers, and we'll share them just in a second when the poll is completed. Okay, I see about 30% have voted. Just let's wait for a few more seconds. Okay, 70% of you have voted. Okay, so far I see that the front runner is understand the customer journey with better data and insights. So for 53% of the respondents. And the second top is reach and engage customers on multiple digital channels. And the one that got the least votes, or 13%, was respond to COVID. And then the other ones were about equal. So Maybe the first question to Fred. What do you think of this result here?
Yeah, it's interesting because, and we'll come back to this later on, but the focus on the customer, there's a few things here: customer journey, there's launching new products and services, that are all have a kind of a customer theme, and they did quite well. But then some of the things that are a little bit more operational, increase productivity, streamline operations, respond to COVID. We took the very same survey as part of research earlier in the year when COVID was first coming on and companies were first responding. And those two things did particularly well. So it shows that there's kind of was a shift where companies really had to adjust their transformation plans. And now, partly because this audience is interested in the customer aspect of transformation by definition from the title of the webinar, but also I think partly because companies have now adapted to COVID. The operational and COVID focus has gone down. We'll come back to this. It'll be very interesting to see as we play this out. And we'll come back to this theme, obviously, of the customer.
Great. So maybe now a question to York. So there are so many drivers for digital transformation, then why do so many companies fail? For example, an October study by BCG pointed out that about 70% of digital transformation efforts in companies fail. What do you think of that? Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ksenia. And I mean, I'm pretty sure there are quite a few former executives here from one of my programs in the audience. And when we talk about drivers, I mean, these are at the same time the challenges, right? And but what I see in class quite often, I mean, linked to this study from BCG, or there are other studies like an Accenture study recently that's saying 70% of companies don't reach their planned ROI when it comes to digital transformation. And for me, the key question here is, I mean, when we say failure, it's a harsh word, right? But many don't reach their objectives. So the key question is A, what are your objectives? And B, what are the main challenges when you want to reach these objectives? And too many organizations, they just have a very narrow definition when it comes to digital transformation, right? They see it as a project investment instead of really a business transformation, right? They follow the latest buzzwords. They invest into buzzwords, right? Yesterday it was IoT, today it's AI, tomorrow it's blockchain. But back to Fred's earlier point, right? And back to the title, if you will, do you have a customer-centric transformation where you transform your organization to create value for the customer? And that requires a digital vision, that requires leadership, that requires the right mindset, strategy integration, right? Maybe the last point on this question, I'm always summarizing this as, yeah, there is technology, don't get me wrong, it's very important, investments in technology, but also investments into the management of the transformation. And only if you are good at both, then you will be successful, right? It's better to walk in the right direction, managing the transformation, than running in the wrong direction by just following buzzwords here.
Yeah, and picking up on that, I think, in fact, Xenia, there's a slide, if you could show it, that has a triangle.
Yeah, that's Milan.
Milan, if you could show that. So I just wanted to pick up on that and tell a story about a client that our firm is working with, Thrivent. And Thrivent is a large financial service company in the United States, not that well known in Europe and Asia, and a diversified one. They sell insurance, retirement products, a whole set of services. And they really they recognized the need to undertake a pretty large, and it started with a digital transformation. But as they started to recognize, and they really needed to update how they thought about dealing with their customers, who are a mix of regular investors and broker dealers who reach those investors, et cetera. And as I said, they started down in the left-hand corner in the kind of, we really need to think about the technology. We need to get up to date. And what they recognized as we were working with them, as they were interacting with other folks who had worked successfully on transformation, is the need to bring in two other dimensions to their definition of what transformation is in the first place. One dimension is to say it's not just technology, it's about the customer. And how do we think about customer value? And one of the things that they saw is that although their sales team was well connected to the customer, the rest of their organization really wasn't. And then the other part is organization building. What do we have to do in terms of the culture of our people, the practices, the tools that they have to make them more digital, but more like there were other aspects in terms of the customer aspect, listening, but also moving fast enough. If you're going to undertake a transformation like this, then how do you think about that? And it really became interesting for them to think about how could I use the business value drivers to really move that. And Jörg's going to talk about those drivers a little bit more. But if you could go to the next slide. One of the things they realized, I'm not going to go through the whole slide, but you can just see these 4 layers. One of the things that they came to grips with was the need to manage transformation at multiple levels. And we've seen this with our other clients. And whether the transformation is a big one, across the whole enterprise, like the Thrivent example, or whether it's a smaller one, maybe just in the marketing team or maybe in the customer service team, et cetera, is the need to set the agenda, to manage the change, to work on those things. And these are the things that typically get the most attention that you're implementing in the market, and to build tech capabilities. And for them, what they did, or what they're doing, is they set up a transformation management office, a separate unit that is staffed by senior leadership and a dedicated team to help make sure that all these 4 layers and the things within them are being coordinated. And it's really had a great impact. But it goes back to this definition of that Jörg was talking about, that transformation, digital transformation isn't just the platforms, the projects that have to be done. It's how do you get the customer into it, and how do you get the organization engaged, right?
Okay, so how do you get the customer into it? So that's again the question of customer centricity that you highlighted here. But a question to Jörg maybe. But most of the organizations, they believe that they understand their customers. So where's the disconnect?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. And I mean, here I have to maybe spend some time on, because when it comes to transformation, back to my earlier point, many organizations follow buzzwords, right? I mean, and by the way, I see the questions coming in. Jose, I mean, your question on developed shared goals. I mean, before we even answer how to deal with it, that's the first important point. Understanding your objectives. Where do you stand today as an organization? What's your digital maturity, right? And then also, where do your customers stand today? And they have a different digital maturity than, let's say, the customers from tech companies, right? So it's very important to think about it. It's also important to look at these digital natives. We can learn a lot from it, but ask yourselves the question, do I need to exactly be like them? Question mark, right? Then you might be just following buzzwords. I mean, in our book, I mean, this customer-centric notion is very critical for Fred and myself, and we strongly believe in it. The data is showing successful digital transformation are driven by customer needs. And that's why we researched with over 2,000 executives these 3 transformational shifts we talked about earlier. In short, I mean, these shifts are about how do I sell more? How do I sell differently? And how do I sell new? And within each of these shifts, we are saying leaders have to address 4 essential questions: where to play, how to win, what to do, and who to win with. And now back, Jose, to your question. I mean, where to play? What's your objective? Is a critical one. And if you think about the 3 shifts, if I spend maybe a minute on each of these shifts, I mean, the first one, again, it's about how to sell more. I mean, we call it the digital selling shift, right? How can we improve how customers learn about our purchase or products or solutions? So at the end of the day, it's this shift where you move away from this classical model where marketing and sales is separated, right? We also see this, by the way, in many B2C organizations, right? It's not just B2B here, and where marketing is a support function of sales. And within this shift, I mean, to give you maybe a framework here, we developed this 4C framework, which is clarify the target, capture attention, cultivate interest, and convert to action, right? So it's really about how do you engage, how do you create tailored content, and how do you, literally execute digital demand generation, right? So, and of course, content is an important part here. If you think about capture attention and cultivate interest. And again, there are many great examples from B2C and B2B that really find a way how they can leverage these digital technologies to engage better with their customers. If we move to the second shift, digital experience makeover, as you can already imagine, this shift is about selling differently, right? So how can I create a better experience? And I mean, as some of you maybe know, I'm a big believer. I'm always saying you do not need to be best. You need to be best at being different for what customers care about, right? And now ask yourself, can you differentiate yourself just through the product? Most likely not, right? Many of you will most likely answer this question with a no. So where can you differentiate yourself? It's about powerful experiences. And by the way, here maybe an example, 2 years ago, I did a big study with IBM where we interviewed 12,000 senior executives, C-level executives actually. And to understand what drives financial success. And the key driver was, there were multiple things, but key drivers were understanding what customers really want, their unmet needs, optimizing customer experiences. And the third one was the customer journey mapping exercise. So again, when we think about also back to the questions here in the chat, if you think about customer-centric transformation, I need to understand the customer journey. I need to identify the pain points. And then I think about what technologies can I leverage. Maybe just to round this up, there's this great example Fred and I use about Maersk. Again, a container shipping company, great example how they underwent this digital experience makeover. Because they also realized at one point, we cannot differentiate ourselves just through the product anymore. So we need this experience. So they did the segmentation, they identified the where to play and how to win. And I mean, if you look at them now, they have an end-to-end experience where value is created at every stage. Better terminal utilization, self-service, instant container booking, real time, no overbooking anymore, all thanks to leveraging data and digital trends, but always focusing on the pain points. And maybe just quickly the last one, sorry, to go through all the three shifts here, the digital proposition pivot, which we think is a critical one, and because this one is about new innovative solutions. So remember, the first two shifts are focusing on your current products, on your current experiences, if you will, while the third one is really moving to a new proposition pivot. I mean, the overused examples here, as you all know, Airbnb, selling no rooms, right? Fintechs like Number 26, EasyBank in Austria, you name it, TransferWise, Alibaba, no inventory. I mean, the overused example, but there are many others like Hilti, renting their tools as they identified, we don't need to sell it anymore. Michelin the same, or ThyssenKrupp, now you don't pay for the elevator, you pay literally for how many meters it goes up and down. I mean, great innovations, great business model proposition pivots, because they realized if we are just customer centric in our maybe dying business model, customer centricity doesn't help you at all, right? And I'm always saying it's, I mean, this is a quote actually from a BMW executive He said at one point, do not optimize the fax machine if people want email. Right? And that's what the proposition pivot is about. I mean, realizing when is your current business model dying and when do you have to jump on the next one? I mean, I'm pretty sure, Fred, you have examples.
Yeah. So the real key then becomes, then how do you really do this, right? With these, as Jörg said, you need to start with an agenda around these three shifts that is a customer-centric agenda, right? But that doesn't really answer the question about how you can get this to happen. And we see a few best practices. And I want to pick up on a company that I've worked with in Asia, AXA, who were really undergoing quite a big shift at the leadership, under the leadership of their new CEO, Gordon, who came in and said, hey, we have a real growth opportunity. And we've got a great brand. We used to be the leader in the region in a whole bunch of categories. We're not anymore. We can be the leader again, but we're going to need to undertake a very large transformation. And that transformation, you can see in the kind of the public domain, you see the advent of a new representative of the brand, Emma, who's a virtual agent, but it's more than that. They're working on how to connect better to people's health, to create new services, to create new experiences, to reach customers that they've never reached before. It's really a remarkable, and it's going quite well. But underneath it, there are a few key mechanisms or best practices that I want to highlight. One of the very first of them, and by the way, what's interesting, because I think one of the people in the chat asked, can you do this in a world where you're not talking straight to the customer? And can you emulate best where you actually have to go through intermediaries? A lot of Access business is through intermediaries. And the second one is, can you do this if you're not a digital native? And they're about as far from a digital native as possible. And then interestingly, they did not necessarily look to digital natives as their examples. They looked to other companies like them who were doing a good job. But best practice number one, that is to have a use case orientation. And this use case orientation, it's interesting. The kind of the definition of a typical use case is to say there's a group of customers that have a need or a problem that we can solve. And often that can be thought of, and people who are good at technology are think about it often at a very discrete level, a very particular use case. I need to tell the time today. But what's interesting, when you start with this orientation, a use case can be very big. It can be, consumers and access problem. Consumers are really having a hard time connecting what they're doing in terms of their financial planning with what they're doing in terms of their health planning and managing their health. And that actually led to the objective setting at the very beginning. And then below that, there are then particular use cases with segments. And below that, there are ones that then drive particular applications. But what happens is when you think this way, then the technology starts to solve the use cases. So technology becomes at the service of the customer. The second thing, and it doesn't sound very customer-centric, but it's crucially important, and several people in the chat have mentioned this, is the move that they made to agile processes. And why? You say, but what does that have to do with the customer? Because if you can loop faster, and many agile processes are really good at including customer feedback fast. Usability testing with 10 people, concept testing with 20 people, get feedback, move on to the next thing, creating a test and learn approach, then that's how you bring the customer in from the very beginning. But it's also how you move fast enough through your agenda so that you can learn from the customer what's working and not. And I would say this is the other best practice that happened at AXA. Now, by the way, it was very disturbing for middle management because how you manage agile processes, I would say it's very trainable, it's very learnable. The people on the teams learn well, but the folks in middle management often resist it. And so having a program, and then I think is the last part, is a program that connects what has to happen on the org side and the measurement side with both the customer and the employees, so that we're getting people, especially in leadership positions, to change their behavior, not just the people at the top or the people at the bottom. And I would say that's the third thing. And that's where Gordon really made a phenomenal contribution to thinking about how this organization needs to change to be more customer-centric and to deliver more things to the customer. But he didn't just focus on what were the things we were going to launch, right?
Interesting. So you've mentioned a lot the use case orientation and learning from customers. So is this focus on customers why a transformation guide tailored to B2B is so important?
Yeah, so what we found, so of course, Jorg and I focused, we did a lot of research in the B2B area. But what we've done now is we've looked at some other research. I serve a mixed group of customers, so does Jorg in terms of his classes. And we find that the principles are very similar, but because you need to focus on the customer, so when I say similar, the principles are similar. What I would say is that these principles of transformation are similar, whether you're in B2B, B2B2C, or B2C, or even B2G, although I don't know as much about that type of business. And I don't think, Jorg, you've not done that much with business to government either. But we'd say the principles are simpler, but because it's customer-centric, the techniques you use to do the work need to be different. I'll give you just one example of this, is that if you're doing a customer journey map and you have learned how to do it for a B2C market, then figuring out how to do it in a B2B market, it's very different. Lots of intermediaries, lots of decision makers, and you've got to really, I'll call it, build a different type of map. Right? So that's the first thing. You have to be at the level of execution different in B2B versus B2C. And then the other thing that we've seen from very recent research, this is research that you can actually get on our site, B2B digital transformation.com. But it's a new study by Altimeter, sister company of the company that I work from, on the 2020 state of digital transformation. And what's interesting here is this idea of digital maturity, and that the old model was, oh, you need to look to the I'll call it often B2C digital natives as your example of the best practices. And I would say, frankly, that is very hard to do. Those businesses are often very different. And also, even the ones that have some great best practices, the gap between where you are and where they are is so big that practical implementation becomes really hard. And instead, what this research indicates is that there are 5 levels of maturity. We're not going to go into that today, but what you can do is you can look within B2B, within B2C, within B2C, and look at companies that are more mature than you, and what are they doing, and emulating them. A real good example is in B2B, the way that, for instance, AI is being used in targeting, in, for instance, the insurance, the commercial insurance business, is really, really interesting and really helpful for companies that can learn from others what's going on. So those, I think, are the kind of the 2 big ideas that no, it's not limited to one industry, B2B or B2C, but that there's maturity within them, and that's where the best practices are found. And then although the press loves to talk about the most fancy and elaborate new models that are digital native models. For a lot of companies, that's not actually the place to find how to get better because they didn't start as digital natives.
Right. I saw a question in the chat about how do you measure this digital maturity, but maybe this is something where you could address later. So now just building up on what you were saying in terms of this, building this customer-driven tests and the lean culture, so staying agile and getting the customer feedback first. So this seems like quite a big task. So maybe a question to Jörg. So what could be some best practices here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I'm glancing at the chat here. I think it's Pedro, you asked that question earlier here. Let me answer this live. Where to start a successful digital transformation? Culture, management, customer understanding? Is there a good recipe? I mean, again, remember, first of all, you need to find out for your situation what's the recipe. But I mean, what we say, maybe you can show the slide about the body, mind, soul, because at the end of the day, and that hopefully answers also many of the other questions we see here, we talked a lot about the middle, the DNA, the strategy, understanding the customer, right? But Pedro, I mean, back to your question, this only works if you have the right enablers in place, if you have the right soul, right? If you have the right symbols, if you have the right body. Do you have the IT? Do you have whatever, the CRM systems? Do you have the right processes, the right tools, right? If you don't have this in place, how do you want to transform and how do you want to execute a customer-centric transformation? And then most important, I mean, Peter Drucker, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. The mindset, right? You need to have the right mindset. If you don't have this, it will fail. And it goes back also, Stefan. I mean, I see your question here. What's the recipe, right? 10% analytics, 20% tech and data, 30% people and processes. Again, I would argue it depends. If you have an organization where your people already developed this mindset, you might focus more on the technology and the data. If you have an organization where the mindset, the culture is not there, you need to change it, right? You need to change it first.
Yeah, you're just coming in on that.
Yeah, maybe just last comment, just quickly, because the philosophy Fred and I always talk about, people first and people last. So people first means you need to be customer centric. You need to understand what they want. And people last, you need the mindset, the culture, the people that execute it. Fred, sorry.
Yeah, but coming in on that. So the first thing, this idea of where I start. First of all, among large companies, it's pretty rare that they haven't already started. They just haven't called it that. That there's a high level of digital innovation that's starting to drive some pretty big change, either because they don't have a choice or because it's happening at a divisional level, et cetera. So that's kind of the first thing. And one of the places to start is to just start leveraging what's already going on. Now, that sounds very pragmatic. But often, in large enterprises, there's such a diversity of activity, it's hard to see. But then the other one, and more fundamentally, is if you look at when this works well, and there's quite a few examples. The Maersk example we had, the AXA example is another good one, where the leaders start with what can we do to grow our business among our customers? What are the one or two really big opportunities out there? And then that drives an examination. Well, if we're going to use digital transformation as a way to really, let's call it, reinvent the experience or improve how we sell to them or improve what we sell to them, then really doing an evaluation of where do we stand to deliver against that big use case. And sometimes organizations can be quite advanced in terms of aspects of where they are on body, soul, and mind. For instance, a lot of engineering companies have gotten quite good at implementing agile processes, but they need to get much better at using data and analytics to drive what the people are working on. And so when we say it all depends, the starting point always, we think, starts with the customer.
Yeah.
Then it goes to evaluating where you are in terms of your capabilities, and then getting to work on some quick wins. That's the other thing we see pretty consistently is you have to walk before you run. And Jorg will talk a little bit about this some more. But the companies who make the most progress find some quick wins, and quick wins sometimes are things that really are momentum builders that gets the pace going. You start to learn, and then you start to recognize other areas of capability or of management that you need to do. I know that's a long-winded answer, but hopefully that gives you a feel for how we think about it, at least.
But this also is a nice point, Fred, because I think it answers the question from Charlotte here in the chat. What advice do you have to create this urgency, right? I mean, first of all, maybe COVID, unfortunately, it happened, but it also showed the urgency to many organizations. Right? I'm getting lots of emails, lots of calls from former students. I literally had even one last week who was saying, you know what, we discussed the problem at our company for 5 years, and then COVID hit, and we solved it in 2 hours. In 2 hours, because we needed to, right? So, but do we always need this external trigger to create this urgency? And that's where I'm back with Fred's your comment on use cases, on success stories, right? That also help you to create this sense of urgency. And it shows people that are still resistant to change that often change is a good thing, right? That the ideas you have, the solutions you have actually have a positive impact.
Yeah, and then I think that then opens up the door for some themes that I think we've seen in the chat and the questions. Then you say who should lead, and who that's one, and then the other one is how do you kind of think about the organization. So the first thing on the who should lead, what we that's hard for us to say, but what we can share is some recent research also available on our site. That gets at this idea of the state of digital transformation. Right now, the majority, and we're talking about 70% of all transformations, are led by either the chief technology person, CIO, CTO, or by the CEO. And we also see a divide that when it's the CEO, it tends to be these more holistic transformations. When it's the chief technology person, it is much more around the particular set of projects or platforms that need to be that are being put in place. I'll call them more tactical transformations. And I think what we can observe is it is less about who is at the top, although you need a senior, very senior leader at the top, but who is that core team, and that there needs to be the voice of the customer. Whether that is a chief digital officer, a chief experience officer, a CMO, but somebody who can really speak for the customer and bring the customer into the equation, as well as, and this is, I think, surprising because they're so left out so often, is the HR side. In digital transformations, what you can almost consistently see is that the HR professionals are often sidelined. Now, partly it's because many of them don't have the training in technology, but in the change management process, they can be essential. So that's the first thing that we see. But then the other thing we see is going back to this idea of the organization. It is so tempting to make an organization lead. We need to reorganize so we can do this. We don't see many examples of that working. I'll call it teams that are put to manage and sometimes temporary, sometimes long-lasting, like that transformation management office or like a special task force, seem to do much better at the beginning, especially when they're drawn from a mixture of senior management and middle management. Than doing a big reorg in order to get this. Now, usually reorgs then, as the business opportunity develops, they spring out of that. But companies who start with, I'm going to change all the chairs and where people sit, that just is almost the exact opposite of being customer-centric when it comes to digital transformation.
Right. If I'm not mistaken, York, you've written a number of business cases on this topic. Do you want to elaborate a bit more?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is also, again, looking at the questions here. For example, I mean, the Majid Al Futan case, we actually had a webinar with Alam Bajani, the CEO, a few months ago, which is also hitting on this topic of culture, injecting the right culture, but also the importance of data and the importance, again, back to Fred's earlier point of use cases. Because again, this company, I mean, as the people in the Gulf region know, I mean, they are the conglomerate running the Vox cinemas, doing the Carrefour retailing in that region, where he said at one point, how can I not just have this top-down vision of digital transformation, right? I'm creating the vision, I'm setting up the organization. If again, the middle management, and not just the middle management, if not every employee in the organization is making this change, right? Is driving the transformation bottom up. So he created, just to go a little bit more into specifics here, they created this advanced analytics center of operational excellence where they identified use cases, simple use cases, right? What if I reorganize the shelf in a Carrefour store? What if I cross-sell popcorn and tickets, special tickets at the Vox cinemas, right? Specific use cases, calculating the impact. So that's what this center was doing. But then it was such a success that more and more opcos, more and more departments reached out and proactively asked for help, right? So that's how they were managing the top-down vision driven by Alam Bajani himself, but also how they injected this transformation bottom up by empowering, again, the people. Which is critical. And here, by the way, we haven't touched on this a lot. I mean, we could have our own webinar just on data. But he also realized, and that's another important part, of course, in digital transformation, how do you leverage the data that you have and the data that you can collect to better understand, co-create, deliver, and capture value? And I think that's another part in this case, Ksenia. Yeah.
Zenny, it feels to me like we should just go to questions and answers.
Yeah, I was wondering if you want to add something on data, Fred, or if we want to go.
Yeah, well, I think actually the data sets up actually once again to some of the questions. So when we talk about data, what we're really talking about is companies are really, really good generally at finding ways to get more data. And even the ones that are actually pretty poor, or think themselves poor, have more data at their disposal than they think. But you get two big hurdles. First of all, is the data is in silos. So one of the key things to become customer-centric is how to get the data in a way, especially customer data, so you can see what we call 360 view, a whole view of the customer. And this is hard. Now, it's gotten easier in a cloud-based world where legacy systems are not as big a limitation. Migrating the data to the cloud and then creating this picture is more doable, but that's a key thing. But then the other one is probably more important, is getting the analysis and this test and learn process happening. So analysis to learn from the data, then to do something about it, and because you did something about it, to learn some more. And that simple loop is so key to transformation. And it's so different than companies. So for instance, I've worked with a lot of insurance companies, right? The loop between learning, then making an action, then learning from that action again can take a year, sometimes 2 years. It's surprising, but insurance companies often work extremely slowly. And the real question becomes, guys, how could you do, or team, how could you do that in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, right? Instead of 2 years. And that's it's interesting. It's often a, effective use of data challenge, and creating that capability. So that's all I would add to that data question.
Okay. Great. So let's look at some questions we get here in the Q&A. A few people voted on the question from Dennis asking, how could organizations overcome some of the challenges of digital transformation internally, from employees' pushback, lack of internal expertise, lack of organizational design, limited budget, etc., etc.? And he's curious about the internal mechanism needed to spin the wheels over the pain points. And there were quite a few questions related to that from this pushback from within the organization.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis, I remember even. Hey, good to see you. No, Dennis, very good question. And hopefully the Majid Al-Futam example touched a little bit on this, right? It's not enough to have this top-down support. You need to have the bottom-up. But I'm always saying also employees need like a falling net, right? If you are not allowed to take risks in your organization, right, you might push back, right? What if I'm doing something wrong, right? What if somebody says, hey, we have never done it this way, which are, by the way, the organizations that usually fail, right? I mean, another case I wrote, a link to this question here, is the Kuoni case. I mean, many of you maybe have sit in my classes at one point. The Kuoni, as you remember, the market leader in travel for almost 100 years, bankrupt because of exactly, Dennis, what you said. I mean, employees pushing back at all levels, right? Employees were pushing back, lack of expertise for this new business model. Remember my earlier point on the proposition pivot, the winning business model in this industry, in travel, changed, right? It was the booking.coms of this world and not the Kuoni business model anymore. But employees pushed back, resistance to change, right? So again, here you need a visionary leadership. Goes back to our earlier discussion. You need to allow people to take risk. And now maybe last point on this, Dennis, and also linked to many of the other questions. I see the question here from Robert Webb. How do you balance rapid innovation and customer-facing processes, the legacy application portfolio? It's exactly this, right? How do you monetize maybe within your legacy work you're currently doing? Again, Kuoni, we could argue, they had a winning business model for quite some time. How do you monetize? But at the same time, how do you create this winning new business model? And doing both of it at the same time is just very difficult, right? So you have to ask yourself, do I need to have separate teams that are like, one is focusing on the new ideas while one is focusing on monetizing the status quo, which will be maybe not relevant in 5 years, 10 years anymore. So that's, again, it depends a little bit on your organizational structure and your current digital maturity. But I think very, very good points here. If you don't deal with this employee pushback, with this internal barriers, you will not succeed at transforming your organization. So great questions here from Dennis and as well, and Robert.
Okay, so there is another question coming from Ahmed asking, does digital transformation focus on increasing sales, so via better understanding your customers' real needs and operational efficiency, or should one also look at the ways competition could disrupt your business and allow you to future-proof yourself before this actually happens?
Both, very simply. And I wouldn't say that digital transformation has to always concentrate on sales. I think it is, when we see, examples of digital transformation, some of them are really about direct revenue building activities in the area of marketing and sales. Others are, though, about experiences that lead to not so many necessarily many new customers, but existing customers buying more. And some of them are about new solutions. But all of them have a dimension of a revenue dimension, but they can also have a big productivity dimension. So I can essentially, a customer experience, for instance, can make a big impact on making customers more satisfied and willing to work with you, buy more from you. but at the same time, they can streamline your existing processes, your existing ways of doing business, and save you money. AI is probably one of the biggest applications right now that does that. And it brings with it other problems. So that's the first thing, right? And then the other thing I think is to say that as you think about this, you have to have an eye from where you are in your maturity, but also where the rest of your competitors and potential disruptors are. I've been working a little bit in quite extensively in the medical device area. And here, a lot of innovation going on, but a lot of potential new disruptors. So if you are J&J Medical Devices, for instance, you can look to your direct competitors as you always have. But if you do not keep an eye out for what is around the corner for other companies that could potentially disrupt, and example, Google's health initiatives are one example of bringing AI technology into medical devices. That's a huge disruptor, a huge one. So you need to be both thinking about, I'll call it your normal view and this extended view. And I don't think there's such a thing as future proofing. That's actually one of the things that's come out in the chat that I would challenge a little bit. The idea that you get to a step, for instance, this idea, well, for instance, this one question about, I've done my customer-centric transformation. What next? How do I differentiate? Or I've done this, then what's next? What we've seen is the companies are really good at this. There is no end. It's a journey that gets faster and faster. They get better and better at testing and learning. They get better and better at introducing new things. And the whole nature of the business changes from a set of project initiatives. I can do 2 major initiatives in a year, to companies who have the capability to do just remarkable things in a short period of time. And then differentiation comes from your ability to stay ahead of the market using technology. But it's not necessarily based on any one key thing, because the technology changes, the data changes, and you keep learning. And that ability to learn becomes your advantage.
Thank you, Fred. Well, looks like that maybe it's time to wrap up now here. So based on your experience, what would be maybe the one final advice that you could give to our audience in terms of what they need to do when transforming their companies to digital customer-centric organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would go back to this people first and people last, right? So that's one which I'm always focusing on, again, understanding customer needs and then having the people, the culture, the mindset to execute on this, right? And by the way, maybe here last question to touch on from Kanayo, when you said the question was the first 2 shifts seems to be about moving customers away from pain points, while the third one is about how to move them towards more pleasure, right? I wouldn't say so. Here back to people first and people last, right? In all these 3 shifts, you can enlighten the customer, right? You can enlighten them through engagement. You can enlighten them in the digital experience makeover. And of course, you can enlighten them and create fantastic new outstanding solutions, right? But again, all these 3 shifts have in common, people first and people last. That's what it be for me.
That's good for me.
Okay, great. Well, to learn more about this topic, you're welcome to go to the www.b2bdt.com. Where you will find all the materials and latest research on digital transformation from Fred and York, and as well as their videos, webinars, and more. And they have a special offer for you today. If you're interested in purchasing this book, you can do that between now and Christmas and get it in the INSEAD Footnote store or the INSEAD store in Singapore with a 20% discount.
Yeah, and to get to that, just so everybody knows, if you go to b2bdt.com and go to the guide page and go to the bottom, there's a button for the INSEAD store.
Until Christmas.
Yes, till Christmas, 20%. And I do have a book, so I encourage you to get that. So, and well, as we wrap up, please also take a look at the INSEAD lifelong learning programs of upcoming webinars. And also please check out the INSEAD online programs where I'm working as a coach. So some of the programs are coming up are Strategy in the Age of Digital Disruption, Innovation in the Age of Disruption, where I coach. Plus, Jörg is soon releasing his absolutely new course, Driving Digital Marketing Strategy. So make sure to stay tuned to your INSEAD emails to get information on that. And well, as we wrap up, also you will be invited to share your feedback via Qualtrics that you'll see in the pop-up window. So I hope that you enjoyed this webinar, and thank you very much, Jörg and Fred, for sharing your insights with us today. It was extremely interesting.
Well, thank you, and thanks for all the great questions here from the audience. That's really great.
It was a blast. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and stay safe.
See you. Yeah, thanks. Bye.